Welcome to dentReviews. Tonight I want to do a follow-up video to a video stream that Mark over at Super Review and I did, oh gosh, probably 6 months ago now. Time flies. This is going to be a follow-up to that, which was a blind shootout, where he had sent me 5 IEMs, which I have with me here, and he had me put a blindfold on, and I listened to them, compared them, gave my impressions, kind of guess what driver type they were, things like that. So it was kind of fun. You can check that out on his YouTube channel, Super Review. Well, this one's going to be a long-term impression review, so I'm going to talk about how over the 6 months or so these have grown on me or not, and make some recommendations possibly. So let's dive right into it. I'm not going to go in any particular order. The one I have right in front of me right now is the Sennheiser IE 600. This is sort of a 3D printed shell. It's got a metallic quality to it, and it's got a pretty cool shape to it. They're small. They have a little bit of weight to them. It's a basic cable, like a braided cable with a small cord lock, small midsection, and a nice right angle connector. It's very plastic, kind of just cheap, average quality. Nothing bad, nothing amazing. I do like that it has the rounded ear guides so that you can put it over your ears and it keeps the cable noise to a minimum. They have a pretty comfortable fit. They have a red and black ring so you can easily tell which ears you have in. So it's also just the shape of them makes it easy to feel it and put it in. So I think the design is pretty good. What these are, excuse me, I said they're a dynamic driver. Let me pull up the page here just so I can be as unprepared as possible. They're 7mm true response transducers, not drivers, transducers. They have very low total harmonic distortion. It says it's 0.06% at 1 kilohertz at 94 decibels, if I could read. And gold-plated MMCX connector. Oh, so yeah, these are MMCX connectors, so these you can remove and swap the cable out if you want, which is pretty cool. They have a very neutral sound. These retail for about $700, and I'm just gonna not beat around the bush. I think that's way overpriced for what they are. They're not a bad sounding IEM. In fact, the way I would describe the frequency response is slightly U-shaped on the extreme ends, and what I mean is that they are fairly linear in the mids, and even the bass has a superb bass response. It's gradually lifting up into the sub bass, so I like that kind of curve. That's my preferred bass curve. They don't have any of that extra mid bass bloat in the 1 to 300 hertz range. The treble is also fairly linear. It's got a little bit of a dip around 4 kilohertz, and then it has a little bit of a shelf or a couple peaks and bumps, let's say above 6 kilohertz, primarily around 8 to 10 kilohertz, and then again at 14 to 15 kilohertz. So when you first listen to these, my impression is that they're a relatively clean neutral set with a little bit of extra bright treble. The bright treble is kind of a trade-off. In most cases, I would say that it's not really egregious. It's not like, oh my god, that sounds so bad, but it is there and it is noticeable. And a lot of popular music and a lot of brightly mastered music can sound maybe overly bright, kind of borderline harsh sometimes. They're not really sibilant. It doesn't really focus on the sibilant range, that 5 to 6 to 7 kilohertz. It's a little bit more high treble dominant, so it gives it a little bit more sense of air and maybe treble texture up high, which is, in my opinion, much better than if they had that shelf a little bit lower. But nonetheless, it is elevated in the upper treble. The trade-off, as I mentioned, that's the negative. The positive is that in some music, such as orchestral recordings, some soundtrack music, classical music, things like that, especially in music with a lot of strings, like violins and cellos and string quartets, string sections, things like that, these can kind of give a slightly more high-definition, enhanced quality to the sound because it brings out a lot of that really small textural detail in the strings and the bowing and the air of the ambient recording, and they really kind of just bring a little bit of life into those recordings. At least some of the recordings that might be very, very smooth and maybe even overly soft in the treble, these help to kind of give a little bit of energy and life in that treble. Now again, I personally would still prefer a more linear set, but they sound less objectionable with music like that, analog, kind of warmly mastered music, whereas with more aggressive pop music and things like that, I think that treble shines through as a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more problematic. Luckily, it's never really irritating to listen to in the sense that it's, you know, peaky or harsh. It's just too much, and it sounds a little bit maybe rough, a little bit maybe over textured and a little over airy. And in some songs, it might borderline sibilance and maybe an upper sibilant range. So it is what it is. that's why I primarily think that the price tag is a little high. I don't think it should have that kind of a shelf. Even if the shelf had been half as much, that could have really given them a gorgeous U shape with the farthest ends having a little bit of extra extension to give a little bit of extra energy and, you know, power to your songs, that clarity and that extra low bass. I think they just overdid it. In the bass region, I don't think they overdid it too much. I think if the treble had been balanced with that, the bass again has a really nice curve. It's just a little bit elevated. And in most music, that's not really a bad thing. It just gives it a little bit more physicality to it, a little bit more heft. The texture, the timbre of these is pretty good being a dynamic driver, so I do like that. And again, the overall coherency, the technical performance is actually pretty good. It's not the widest soundstage or imaging that I've ever heard, but they're fairly wide and they have a very precise, you know, the treble is very sharp and incisive, I would call it. It can very easily pick out details, but again, it's kind of boosted in that upper region, so that makes sense that you'd have almost a heightened sense of clarity and detail, but at the cost of maybe a smooth, silky quality. Natural reverb decay is a little bit more exaggerated and you hear the fine noise and character of it, whereas in a neutral earphone, it would just have a natural and smooth decay. Some examples of music, if I were listening to something like BT on these, BT has a lot of, I think, well-mastered music, although he does use a little bit of compression and his songs can border on neutral bright with a lot of, you know, good bass impact and things like that. It's a lot of electronic qualities to it. Well, he has some very, very precise songs like 3.26485, whatever the number is, and also the intro to the song Suddenly. Both of those have a lot of very precise treble, dynamic treble, transient type sounds going on. And with these, they sound very heightened and good, but they can also sound unnaturally dynamic, unnaturally in your face. Whereas in a more neutral set, those transients and those treble nuances can sound very, very precise and accurate. So I think that these just go a little bit overboard on that. But then if you were to take a song like, say, an old acoustic track by Jim Croce, maybe. Some of the Jim Croce recordings had a somewhat softer upper treble, and it's also kind of a neutral analog with not a lot of bass in them because they're very analog and all the acoustic instruments and whatnot. So these can kind of give a nice life to the lower bass and a nice little air boost to that upper treble, and they can make his song sound very good. Just kind of give it a little energetic enhancement, which kind of brings out that really fine detail in his guitar playing. You've Got a Name is one of my favorite songs by him. In the intro bass, you can really hear the string sliding noises and things like that, and it sounds pretty good. Still not my taste per se, but I could see how some people might find that extra added sense of high-def clarity to be a welcome addition. So I'm going to just leave it there. I don't want to beat around the bush here, but I think they're a pretty good sounding set. They don't do anything really wrong other than maybe having a little bit too much of that treble boost. But at the price, I think there are much, much better options in terms of frequency response and technical performance than you get with these. So you'd have to have a very specific target sound that you're looking for, and maybe all the aesthetics and other aspects that you like to demand a price like that. Or maybe if they went on sale, it might be a little bit more reasonable, but even then, I just think I'd say these are overpriced. So that is the Sennheiser IE 600. Next, we're going to look at the Truthear Hexa. So these bad boys are an interesting IEM because I'll be honest, I don't remember what I said in my impressions when I did the blind listening test. However, I've gone back and forth with these over the last few months when I've been listening to them. This set is a combination, I believe, of dynamic drivers and balanced armatures. Let me pull up the information here. It's one dynamic driver, which I believe is the bass, and 3 balanced armature, so it's a hybrid. It's got the 2-pin, it's got the 0.78 2-pin connector, so kind of like that common on the most moon drops and things like that. I'm pretty sure this is the cable that came with it. It's got the Truthear logo, yep. So it's got pretty nice molded ear guides with a little bit of a sheathing around it, which is nice. I find them comfortable. Small cord lock, small center section with the logo on it. It's all braided, and it has a nice right angle connector, which feels plastic, but it's pretty robust, honestly. And most of these connectors I have here, especially these last two, are pretty compact in narrow cylinders, so they fit in most phone cases and things like that. These are a little bit on the larger side, and they have kind of sharp edges, but for me personally, luckily I haven't found that they make any contact with my ear in a negative way, so I feel like they're pretty comfortable. They're relatively light. They look like they're kind of a molded plastic, maybe a resin mixed with plastic. Looking at the nozzles, I find this just an interesting thing to note. They kind of look like they have, if I had to guess, they're very edemotic-like filters, and there's two. There's a green and a red in each nozzle. So that'd be really interesting. I'm not sure, and maybe I should have checked this beforehand, but it'd be interesting to see if those are actual Knowles dampers in there. They look like they're metallic with red and green filters. There's also another dot in there. It looks like it's probably a filter hole, like a bass relief port or something like that. I'm trying to control the bass there. So what I like about the Truthear Hexa, and this is an interesting response, but I really like the overall tonal balance. So if you look at my curve and you pull these up on my site, they have a phenomenally linear bass, maybe a little extra in the 150 hertz area than I would prefer for like a truly clinically perfect bass, but I don't think it sounds overly bloated or warm or anything like that. The treble is very balanced overall in line with the bass, so it has a very similar overall balance, although the treble shape is a little interesting. The 2 to 3 kilohertz is a little bit recessed, which gives it less of a cool edemotic-like quality and has a little bit more of a warm tone to that lower treble. Above that is fairly neutral. It has a little bit of a bump at around 8 or 9 kilohertz for me. It's not drastic. It sounds pretty neutral and pretty clean with maybe just ever so slightly uneven treble. But when I listen to them and I'm not thinking about, any certain frequency region or whatever, they sound very balanced to me, very neutral, very high definition, and very, really just well-tuned earphone. The problem I have with these, and this is something that happened many times over the months that I've listened to these, is as I listen to them, I think, wow, these actually sound really good for a balanced armature hybrid, because as you know, I'm not a huge balanced armature fan in terms of the timbre and the textural quality that they have. But these, when I'm listening to them initially, I'm thinking, these actually sound really good. They have a nice, clean, linear sound. Everything's great. But there are two things that I notice as I listen to these for long periods of time. First, while the bass does sound very linear and has a nice, deep, hitting, low sub-bass and nice, clean bass response, they don't have the tactile impact that I would prefer from something like the Moondrop Kato or even the Blessing 2. But they do have very good bass. There's nothing wrong with the bass. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the upper treble has a balanced armature response. And what I mean by that is the upper treble has, I should say, not a response as much as a texture. The upper treble has a soft quality to it. And as I listen to these for more than like 10 or 20 minutes, that starts to settle in and it starts to become obvious to me that certain songs come on and I just think it has a kind of a soft, muted quality to the overall sound, and that takes away from the bass impact, because the bass impact actually is affected by the treble transients. For instance, if you were to hear a song by the band The Midnight and you were listening to the kick drum, a lot of the kick drums, especially those 80s synth kick drums, there are deep, low sub-bass qualities to them, but there are also high treble transients that give the attack in that initial transient of the instrument itself. So those together give you a tight, deep bass. So without that treble, you get the deep bass, but you don't get as much of the tight, transient quality to the instrument. So it just comes off sounding a little bit less dynamic, less sharp in its transience and texture. So I think overall, unfortunately, as good as the response is, although it's not perfect, it's very good, the texture and the timbre just take it away from me, and that happens with a lot of balanced armatures. I'm not criticizing it. I think for a balanced armature, it's actually one of the better ones I've heard. It's very good. It's just for me, I have a hard time getting past that tonal textural quality of it. So for the Hexa, I'd say I'd probably pass because of my preference with balanced armatures. However, it's a very good earphone, and I think someone who doesn't mind that timbre of the balanced armature will like it. And here's the catch. It's $80. If you asked me if I would take that over the Sennheiser IE 600, I would take the Truthear Hexa because A, the price, and B, just the tonal balance and the frequency response neutrality is just superior to the IE 600. Although I would argue that to my ears, the IE 600 does have a superior technical quality to it. The performance of the transients and the texture and the dynamic coherency is just superior. It's just that does not, unfortunately, outweigh the frequency response issues that the IE 600 has. So that's that. Next, let me jump into the sorry, I'm laughing here. The Akoustyx S-6. The reason I'm laughing at that is because if you pull this up on a graph, and I think I said this pretty clearly in my review, these sound horrible. I don't want to say horrible. They're not the most, you know, I've heard earphones that you get for free on an airliner that sound worse than these, if that says anything. But for me personally, it's just way too scooped out in the midsection. I actually really like the design of the earphones. You probably know I'm a sucker for translucent plastic, and you can kind of see in the midsection of these, which is cool. It's got red and blue and left and right indicators, so it's easy to know what's what. There are markings on the outside that you can feel, but I don't know if you could distinguish them in the dark. So yeah, it's kind of hard in the dark to kind of know which one to put in your ear. I would probably put some glue or something on one of them so I could feel the right ear or the left ear. It's got a pretty smooth rubbery cable. It's not bad. It's got a cord lock, kind of an interesting cord lock. It's got a Y split that I'm not really a fan of, even though it looks like this would probably have more stress relief than a typical cord lock. I have found in my experience that the stress relief that looks like this, these kind of stress reliefs, actually are where the failure occurs. It's not a really flexible stress relief. It's kind of a rigid stress relief. So you can see that, like, the cable bends at the end of the stress relief, and I think that it starts to crease, and over time it fails. I do like that it's all smooth, it's like cylindrical, it's not braided. I'm a fan of that kind of cable. It's got a very nice, very compact right angle connector. It just kind of feels like typical plastic, nothing amazing. The cable is good. The earpieces are kind of these right angle plastic molded earpieces. The design is so small and narrow that they'll probably fit in anyone's ear. They don't really touch any part of your ear, they just go right straight in. That's kind of the overall earphone design. These retail for $175 right now. That's on sale. It looks like the original price is $250. It calls them Studio Reference Tuned Acoustics. It's a planar magnetic driver with front and rear magnets, titanium Kevlar monocrystal grade oxygen-free copper cable. Wow! No, it feels average. I would say it's probably relatively durable. It feels decent. It kind of wraps up compact, which I do like that quality of it, but it doesn't feel like anything special. It just feels like a typical cable, not a lot of strain relief. The cable itself, I don't know. It is an MMCX connector, so it's a Generation 2 MMCX connector, so you could buy another cable, replace this if you didn't like it. That's kind of cool. I think for the price, frankly, I just think you should have a better cable because I'm not really impressed with the frequency response. It reminds me a lot of, and I think I actually guessed this when I was doing the blind shootout with Mark, but it reminds me a lot of the Sony MH755, I believe is the model. It has a very, very similar U-shaped response and treble shelf, only this exaggerates it and makes it even more of a U-shape, and I don't like that. I think the Sony did it well enough that, yes, it was U-shaped, no, it's not perfectly linear, but if you listen to it for a little bit, you adapt to it, it actually sounds pretty good. It's a very clean and clear earphone with just added bass and treble. Whereas this takes it to such a degree that it just sounds so hollow and scooped out and unnatural. I'm going to be completely honest, I don't even want to spend a lot of time on these. I just think they're way out of their price bracket. They do not measure up frequency response-wise to their price range. They not only have an incredibly U-shaped cutout sound, but they also have a big dip and a big peak. The dip is around 11-12 kilohertz and the peak is around 15 kilohertz, and it's drastic. I mean, it's like 10-15 decibels, so like, oof. No, not for me. The only redeeming quality I'll give the response is that from the lower treble to the bass is very smooth. It's not the curve that I like. It is an upward rising bass shelf, that's good, but it's just the U-shaped quantity is too great. But it is at least smooth, I'll give it that. But not a fan, I'm going to pass on that one. All right, next we have the Tangzu Wu Heyday edition. So that is this bad boy right here. Let me take this out. I like the color of this cable a lot. I don't remember if this is original or not. Let's see, does it say anything on it? It probably does not, I don't know. I like the cable, it's kind of cool. I'm going to guess it's not, only because it's a very thick, very custom looking cable with a chunky not right angle connector, chunky normal connector, which looks like it might detach and change ends. So anyway, this is the Wu Heyday edition. It's got kind of a cool look. I'm not into like aesthetics of IEMs in terms of like having designs etched on them and things like that, but it's kind of a simple, kind of swirly design. Almost looks kind of like a Japanese cylindrical motif or something like that, but it's kind of a metallic, a little bit of a heft to it. It's got a nice smooth molded shape to it. I find that it's pretty comfortable in the ear. It doesn't really press on any parts of my ear. It has a nice smooth shape. It's got the right angle, not right angle, but the ear molded curves around the earpieces so that you can, wear it around the ear. Helps with the cable noise, and it is what it is. So the frequency response of these is actually is very, very good, and I would say that these are probably one of the more neutral sets in this lineup. This particular one was, is it Hawaii Bad Boy? Sorry if I'm messing that up, but HBB did a collaboration, and Tangzu and HBB made this model with his kind of tuning preference. So these retail for about $200, and according to the site here, they are 14.5 millimeter planar drivers. Yeah, Hawaii Bad Boy. So these are interesting because the planar driver sounds pretty good. I didn't have any problems with that. Frequency response sounds pretty good. I don't have any problem with that. In fact, the frequency response from like the bass to the, let's say, 10 kilohertz region is pretty good. About, I want to say, somewhere between 8 and 10 kilohertz is a little bit of a peak and then a dip and then another little bump. Around 100 to 150 hertz is a little bit more than I would like. It's not bad though. I think given some time with these, they're a very good set. What I don't like is that there's just some quality to the treble and just the overall sound that just doesn't do it for me. It's not that they sound bad. There's nothing really objectionable. Maybe it's just that up and down wavy aspect to it, but they don't sound liquid clean, super smooth to me. They sound decent performance, decent technicalities, just decent. So I really don't have much more to say about that. The few that I didn't really get on with were the IE600. I thought was decent and worked with some music, but overall I just never really felt drawn to listen to it. The Akoustyx S-6 was just like, take it out of my ears, please. The Heyday, I never really had any objection with it, but I never really was engaged either. I never listened to anything and thought, yeah, this sounds really good, I want to hear that more. Which leads me to the last, and I saved the best for last, because these are the Tin Hi-Fi C2, I believe is what they're called. They're Mech Warriors. Now, the Tin Hi-Fi C2 Mech Warrior is interesting because, honestly, the bass response kind of goes against everything I've said so far. It has a little bit less sub bass, and it has a little bit more of that 100 to 200 hertz region. So it's a little bit, I'd say, mid-bass bloated just a little bit. And then the treble is pretty linear, honestly, up until about 10K. There's a little bit of a dip, but it comes back up right after that and goes up pretty high into like the 18 kilohertz range or so. So it's a very well extended treble. But here's the thing. When I listened to this set, this is the set I always came back to. I always would find myself wanting to hear this more, just thinking, oh, I wonder how this song was sounding. Oh, I wonder if I could listen to this song in it, and let me have some more time with those. So something just drew me more to these. I feel like the overall quality of these, technical performance of these, and the frequency response was just superior to all the other sets. And here's the irony, and I'm just telling you how it is. Whether someone thinks I'm crazy or not, good for them. These are $30. $30 freaking dollars, and I would take these over every set here without question, like hands down. They are 10 millimeter dynamic drivers, and if you know me, I love dynamic drivers. And I could clearly, and I think I did this in that blind test, I can clearly decipher that these have a better textural quality, timbre, a better dynamic impact, and a better transient response than any of the other sets, and that comes across in the listening to me. The upper treble of these gives them a slight sense of added high definition kind of clarity, but unlike the Sennheiser, they didn't push it too far. In fact, I think they did a really good job of making these very slightly U-shaped. The only change I would make if I was going to kind of tweak it would be to take that bass shelf and kind of shift it downward so that it was a little bit less mid-bass and a little bit more sub-bass. It would still be U-shaped in a sense, but it would have a little bit more of a natural bass in my opinion. Or of course I would just make the whole thing match my target perfectly. But I don't mind that they're slightly U-shaped because it's very slight. It's not drastic. It's just a little bit extra kind of on the upper spectrum. Everything above, let's say, 5 or 6 kilohertz is just a little bit raised, and everything below, let's say 300 hertz is just kind of a little bit raised. So you get a nice sort of gently warm, slightly U-shaped sound that has a very neutral quality to it, without any objectionable peaks or dips. The only dip that I see on the graph is around 10K. And if I were to play with EQ, it does improve it a little bit, but it's not something that is audibly objectionable. I don't listen to it and think, oh man, there's a huge missing region of treble. In fact, compared to the others, at least, I think that the treble sounds more filled out and more natural, more texturally competent and accurate. Technical performance on these is very good. They sound very wide in imaging, very spacious in depth, very precise and incisive in the treble to hear all the minute details and micro contrast between instruments. There's a lot of space between instruments. So just to give some examples, when I listen to David Gates, who's one of my favorite musicians, the guy from Bread, if you know Bread, I can listen to a lot of his songs like Never Let Her Go, or Clouds and Rain Suite, or Guitar Man, or whatever. And all of the songs just have a very, very nice layered soundstage of instruments, with the acoustic guitars being very naturally strummed sounding. The transients and the percussive elements in the drums sound bright and clear without ever sounding harsh. The bass, while not perfectly linear, doesn't ever sound unnatural. It just has maybe the slightest bit of warmth to it, which can sound good with a lot of those analog recordings. And it gives it a little bit of nice body, and it still hits very low and deep. So all the percussive drum kicks and low toms and things like that have a nice body, a nice fullness to them. If I listen to something like a piano song and an instrumental piano song, the piano has a very nice full body. Again, maybe on the slightly warm side with a little bit of that extra treble texture, but they sound very natural and very realistic, and you can easily get lost in a piano recording that's well recorded and think that you're listening to someone playing the piano. Another example, because I've listened to so much music with these, would be, listening to something like Dave Grusin and his jazz pieces like Rondo, or one of those songs, or even Mountain Dance. Everything is very precise, very clear, just enough of that tape hiss to sound like a natural analog recording without being overly bright and noisy. And it just has a very good overall coherency. Things from low to high, front to back, up, down, left, right, everything just sounds good. Not the best I've ever heard, but very good. And I would easily be content with a set like this, because for the price, there's really nothing wrong. They don't do anything wrong. They're comfortable. They have a nice design. They look pretty cool. They're, I think, plastic that looks like metal. I don't really know. Maybe they're metal. I'm not going to bother looking. But they have a 2-pin connector, like a Moondrop 0.78 2-pin connector. I have the Moondrop tips on these, and they work really well. They're just good quality. I like them. I don't know if this is the original cable, triple one, so probably not. But they're very nice. I like them. I think that of all the sets that I have here, I would take these hands down, especially for the price. I would say that these are better than the Moondrop Chew, even though the Moondrop Chew might technically be more linear towards my target. I think pretty close. The Moondrop Chew just has a treble quality that I dislike, even though it's slight and it's a great set and it's a phenomenal value. I just don't like it as much as some other budget sets. This one is one of my favorites in the Zero, Salnote Zero. That's another superb quality set. But even that set, I think the treble and the technical performance of these are a little bit more smoother, less aggressive sounding, and more natural sounding. Even if maybe just a little bit less clear in their tonal balance, like they're a little bit warmer maybe, they still just come across as sounding more high quality to me. So far, these are one of the king earphones of the budget for me. So that's kind of the roundup of all these IEMs that I had in that blind listening shootout, and hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any questions for me, you can leave them below. And please subscribe, like the video, share it with other people. I'm trying to get as much content out as I can. I know it's been a long time. There's been a lot going on. I'm hoping to post more often and get more educational content out as soon as well. But again, I do appreciate every one of you guys. I don't know why you're still watching this video at this point, but I do appreciate it, and I thank you guys, and you guys have a great day.